On our last episode, we traced the fascinating evolution of the word Bohemian from its simple geographic origins through a massive 15th century French misunderstanding that wrongly applied it to the Romani people, and finally to its transformation in the mid 1800s Paris. There, struggling artists and intellectuals consciously claimed the label for themselves, rejecting materialistic bourgeois society in favor of art and freedom, where writers like Henry Mercer and composers like Puccini romanticize the lifestyle. Starving artists choosing beauty and authenticity over comfort and respectability. Today, we continue the journey as the lifestyle jumps across the pond. And much like Eddie Murphy when he pretended to be that African prince in that movie with Arsenio Hall, Bohemianism is coming to America. Welcome back to the Bohemian Cowboy. I am Dillon.
And I'm Brian.
And we're getting back into our Bohemian episodes today. Today, we find ourselves in New York City, Greenwich Village.
So I'm guessing you're losing the French accent on this one,
Yeah, I'm
on this
gonna pick up.
episode. Okay.
I'm gonna pick up a New Yorker accent.
That
We're in
that jump
we're in
that
New
jump.
York now.
Yeah. You talking to me?
You
Are
talking to
you
me?
talking to me? Forget about it.
Forget about it, man. I'm a Bohemian.
I'm walking here.
Greenwich Village. There's a place called Pfaff's Beer Cellar, Pfaff. It's an underground establishment, literally underground. You walk down steps to get there. It's dark and smoky, and it becomes a gathering place for America's first self described Bohemians. These are young journalists and writers who've read about the Parisian lifestyle and think, hey, we could do that here. Oh, sorry. Hey, we can do that here. They're champions of free expression and unconventional living, and they're trying to transplant that Latin Quarter energy to Manhattan. The leader, or at least the organizer, is a guy named Henry Clapp Jr. He's a journalist, and in 1858, he founds a periodical called the New York Saturday Press. And this becomes the mouthpiece of the movement, the official voice of American Bohemia. Other notable people hanging around Pfaff's beer cellar and echoing the cries of Clapp are names like Walt Whitman, the poet who came to define American freedom, American individuality. Poems like Song of Myself, I Contain Multitudes. He's there drinking beer in a cellar with other rebels, talking about art and freedom and breaking free from society's chains. Now, Brian, Leaves of Grass is one of my favorite poetry collections by Walt Whitman.
Mm-hmm.
And I used to carry it with me to design studio back in college.
Really?
Yeah, that was my um, inspiration, my poetic inspiration when I was trying to be the most creative, probably the most bohemian like in my design career
Okay.
in college. And so, no, I didn't have a lot of friends in college, Brian. Thank you for asking.
Oh,
And that was why.
things haven't changed much, have they? No, no, I'm kidding. I'm just kidding.
I have one friend
Yeah.
that, right?
Yeah. This awkward silence. Yeah. No, of course you do.
Uh, yeah, they one of the Walt Whitman poems is called "Oh Captain, My Captain." Well, it's actually not called "Oh Captain, My Captain," but the line "Oh Captain, My Captain"
Mm-hmm.
comes from one of his poems. And I'm sure you've seen the Dead Poets Society, the
Mm-hmm.
movie, you
Yeah.
know. That was where I first heard the line. Robin Williams' character gets all the boys to read poetry and
Mm-hmm.
stand up on their desk and say, "Oh Captain, my Captain." Um, but yeah, that was Walt Whitman was my inspiration back in college, and I loved Leaves of Grass. Just as a little side note, a little
Yeah.
personal information from me.
It's nice. I like it. Did you find it helped? I mean, you said it was kind of your inspiration for creativity and so forth. Did you find that was just having it there made a difference?
Unfortunately, probably not. Uh, uh, you talking about how architecture is the art of building.
Hmm.
The one thing that I do struggle with as an architect is the creative side, as far as being overly creative and creating something that's just elegant and kind of out of the world.
But remember, form follows function.
I think I
Yeah.
abide by that rule more so than
Yeah.
make it
It has to be
beautiful.
functional. If you can't, if
Yeah,
it's not functional, then it's meaningless. To me, it has to, at least in this context,
yeah.
I mean, you don't want a toilet in your kitchen. Well, actually, I take
Actually,
that
that
back. I
no, that
take
sounds
that
like a
back.
really great idea. You wouldn't have to leave the kitchen.
Exactly. If you could have like a pull-out bed and a toilet and refrigerator and a kitchen sink, you'd be good to go.
No, no, that actually makes me think of the lifelong adage: if you don't crap where you eat,
Well, okay, that's true.
that I mean, everybody knows that. So
Fair enough.
yeah, that's probably why we don't. That's probably why we don't
We don't
do
have
it.
toilets in our kitchens.
That's right. Yeah. Okay. So Walt Whitman and all of these Bohemians in Pfaff's beer cellar. It's a romantic vision, but that vision isn't the whole story. These societal systems get to have the last word. So buckle up, Brian. It's going to get a little dark here. There's a woman named Ada Clare. She's called the Queen of Bohemia, capital Q and capital B. She runs one of the most influential salons in New York. Artists, writers, thinkers, they all come to her gatherings, and she's central to the movement, a celebrity in the Bohemian world. A quick side note about Ada: she was born in 1834 to an aristocratic family in Charleston, South Carolina. Claire was expected to live the life of a Southern belle. However, she rejected these social constraints. Following the death of her parents, she used a small inheritance to travel to Paris, where she became enamored with this bohemian lifestyle in the Latin Quarter. Upon moving to New York City in 1854, she legally changed her name to Ada Clare, which was inspired by a character in Charles Dickens' book Bleak House, where that was to protect her family's reputation while she pursued a career on stage and in journalism. Claire's influence was cemented at Pfaff's beer cellar. She came to financially support these periodicals that were uh, discussing and telling the stories of the Bohemian lifestyle. But remember the first part of her story. Where does that money come from? South Carolina, plantation wealth. Her family owned enslaved people, and the inheritance that allowed her to live this unconventional artistic life, it came directly from slavery. Then there's another character, Edward Howland. He's the financial backer behind the New York Saturday Press. The periodical doesn't even exist without him. And his money also came from South Carolina plantation wealth. It's important to remember that this isn't a minor detail, this is the foundation. The American Bohemian movement, the rebellion against the establishment, was literally funded by the most brutal and oppressive part of this establishment. And here's what makes it frustrating, because Walt Whitman's poetry is still brilliant, right? The ideas about freedom and expression, they still matter. It doesn't matter how they were funded or what propped up this movement. But it forces us to acknowledge that no rebellion is ever truly pure. Ideas of freedom are always tangled up in systems of oppression. You can't say this was the good part and that was the bad and call it a day. They get tangled. Bohemian idea was supposed to be about rejecting wealth and about choosing poverty for the sake of art. But even outsiders need money to survive.
I don't see why anything in there is mutually exclusive. That to be an artist, that you can't be successful, or to give up, to give again, we get into these stories that
Hmm.
we've been told, that we believe that that money money in and of itself is inherently bad. And there's nowhere, like even biblically speaking, it doesn't say that money is bad. It says the love of money is bad. In fact, I just recently heard someone say that they actually love money, not for the sake of money itself, but they said money is God in action. So you can do good things with money. So a lot of it
Sure.
comes down to intent. It comes down to purity of heart. It comes down to, whether you're overcome with greed or whether you're overcome with generosity. You know, for every light, there's a dark.
Mm,
You can't have a light without a shadow, and the difference becomes what you choose, which side you choose to look through, what lens you decide to look through, and where you decide to act from. You know, you could be very, very artistic but shunning money just for the sake of shunning money because it becomes a badge of honor. Well, I start looking at that going, well, are those motives really pure? Because it's all ego driven one way or another, So it's just where do you choose to act from?
sure. And that what you're saying almost makes me think of a Robin Hood kind of a mentality of like,
Hmm.
okay, we're going to take this money that was obviously very inhumanely gathered and compiled, but what we're going to do with it gives back to somebody else. I don't know. I'd have to think through that
Yeah.
concept a
I
little bit
mean,
more.
and to me, I think it's, I think it's when you have to blow a trumpet and say that you are something and say, oh, I'm a Bohemian. Well, because of that, then I have to live this lifestyle. I have to do this.
Mm,
I have to be poor. I have to fight the system. I have to, whatever it is. And it's like, well, same thing. It's like, oh, I'm a cowboy. I have to dress this way. I have to act this way. I have to have this language that goes with it. And those are all just ego imposed rules that we
hmm.
put on things. I think anytime you have to point out, like if somebody says, well, I'm really a generous person. Well, if you have to say that, you're probably not a generous person.
Right.
You,
Yeah.
it's like you just do, you just live. But to sign up saying, oh, I need to become a part of this society, this culture. Well, I've got this money. Well, I might as well just flush it down the toilet. Because I can't be a part of this if I have money. And it's like, well, saying, well, you can't come into this club because you don't have money. It's like you know,
Brian,
some of the rules don't make sense.
you're right on. And I think this next little chapter we're going to talk about is hits on that point exactly. American Bohemian is going west. We follow this idea across the continent to San Francisco, 20 years after the gold rush. The city's booming, it's wild, it's chaotic, and people are trying to make a name for themselves in the new frontier city. And then they form a club, the Bohemian Club, founded by journalists and artists. A guy named Bret Hart is involved. He's a famous writer who wrote The Luck of Roaring Camp. Mark Twain shows up, Samuel Clemens himself. These are the titans of the American literature, and they're creating an institution dedicated to the Bohemian ideal. But immediately, the sense of the ideal evolves once again. These journalists, and this is what I think you were getting at, Brian, these journalists and artists, they start making money. They become successful, established, respectable. They become pillars of the community, the kind of men who wear good suits and join clubs and have investments. And they don't want to give up the Bohemian label. They like it, it makes them interesting. It makes them artistic, unconventional, even though they're now firmly planted in the establishment. So they change the definition. They redefine bohemianism to mean something completely different. Now it means being a bon vivant, a sportsman, a connoisseur of fine arts, a good time companion, and someone who appreciates culture and knows how to have fun. Notice what's missing? The poverty, the core elements, according to our earlier definition of bohemian. And so this is where I think it starts to melt into your definition that you were just talking about, Brian. This bon vivant idea, you know, although it's interesting and it's cool to visualize the starving artist in Paris and having talked about some of those ideas, you and I have talked about maintaining investments, as a side thing. sportsman. I love the idea of being a sportsman. I want to be someone who goes out and adventures and has a sense of play about me.
Hmm.
A good time companion. I think that image um, makes me think of the most interesting man in the world. This whole idea of like a sportsman and the new definition of bohemian makes me think of the most interesting man in the world from those Dos Equis commercials.
Yeah.
But this, I think, is what you were just alluding to, which is you can have both and, right? Like, why not be a bohemian and be successful
Yeah.
in what you
Oh,
do?
so you bring up a good point, and that's we are, you know, we get into this habit, and I think it happens in an early age, is that we approach life from an either or situation rather than a both and. Then I can have this and this.
Yeah.
I think if you were to be able to do some kind of time travel, um, and you went back in time, to the original Bohemians, you know, and like we just talked about the history and all that. If you were to talk to them, about money, it's not that they didn't want money. It's that they just didn't have it, because of what they were doing. It's not that if somebody like you were saying that like the one gal that she had trouble paying rent because their landlord wouldn't take art as payment. You know, but if the landlord would take art as payment, she would have been fine. If
Exactly.
it's just another form of payment. It's another form of money. And
Currency.
again, I come back to the thing. It's the relationship with money that makes it. But somehow it became a badge of honor, like the hand to the brow, like, oh, I'm impoverished, but I'm an artist, and so I'm a bohemian, and it
Hmm.
became a badge of honor, and rightfully so, But yeah, I think it's misplaced because I think for me, Bohemian, when it comes down to maybe I won't say the purest definition because I guess that's just a matter of opinion. But if the focal point is that creative lifestyle, to me, finance doesn't doesn't play a part. I mean,
Mm.
it's there's it's irrelevant. Because I guarantee if somebody had taken the Bohemians and like we've discovered, it's like, oh well, your music is worth something or your art is worth something. It's not like the Bohemians are going, oh no, I can't take payment for that. You just have it because I'm supposed to be starving. I'm supposed to be impoverished.
Right. Yeah. It's the principle that I need to uphold,
Exactly.
that I need to be impoverished.
Exactly. Yeah.
Hmm.
Misplaced loyalties.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's a really good point. Is yes and not a either or.
Hmm.
Um, and when you start to break down a yes and, you have to tease out fundamental values of it. So like, what are the fundamental values of bohemianism that we can take and say yes, it's this. It's being true to
Creativity and
yeah, it's creativity. It's being true to our art. Like
hmm
using art as an expression of ourselves.
hmm
Some of these other more profound probably values, and
hmm
it doesn't mean that we can't make money or that we're greedy or evil because we are making investments or just making a living because we live in a society. I guess this is the key, is like, because we live in a society that doesn't accept paintings as payment, right?
well, everything
People want
everything's
money.
in exchange. And
Yeah.
it's at some level, this is going to sound kind of out there, but it's all just energy. It's we view money as a thing, and we view money as the value in it is what it can buy. But it's all just an exchange. It's like, well, if somebody said, I'm going to give you this apartment to stay in, but in exchange for that, would you come out and cut my grass, every week? People say, yeah, okay, I'll do that. It's an even exchange. Well, some people say, well, that's just a trade. Well, is that capitalism? Is it, is it socialism? Is there,
It's a
it's
market.
just an exchange.
Yeah.
So if somebody says, well, I'm going to give you this little piece of paper that's got a number printed on it, and I'm going to give you that in exchange for your painting. It's still just an exchange, you know. I think what happens is when the focus becomes, again, it's the intent, it's whether things are being done from a free-flowing sense of generosity or whether it becomes a very constrictive place of greed. And
Yep.
yeah, I need to get all I can get because there's not enough out there. Got to get the biggest slice of pie I can because this is the only pie available. Even though you look and go, well, shoot, there's going to be another pie tomorrow and one the next day and the next day. There's plenty of pie for everybody.
Mm. Hmm.
Mm. It's, you know, our limiting beliefs. There's plenty.
Well said, Brian. There's gonna be more pie tomorrow. Just remember that.
Yeah, always more pie.
There's always gonna be more pie.
Unless you're a cake kind of person, you know, then the pie reference is, yeah, it's probably lost on you. But so my
Uh,
apologies to anybody out there if you like kind of like the cake or the,
all
you
the
know,
cake eaters.
the cake.
I don't discriminate. I like pie and cake, so
Yeah.
you can
See
use
now there,
either.
see now right there would be a creation if you could combine a pie and a cake.
Mm, like
Uh,
a pake,
a pike.
a pike.
That sounds fishy. Pike. Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, anyway, yeah, that's that. There's a rabbit hole there. Okay. Sorry, didn't mean to get down there.
What about Bohemian culture, counterculture, and its influence on music during the 20th century? This is where we have to acknowledge that there's a massive gap in the historical record. We know Bohemianism influenced American literature. We can trace that. We have the evidence from Whitman to Clapp to Twain. We can follow the thread, but music is less documented, and the musicians of those times even less so. But here's what we suspect is that the Bohemian communities and jazz communities overlapped. They had to. They were in the same cities, New York, Chicago, New Orleans. They were in the same neighborhoods at the same clubs where these people gathered to experience art in the mainstream society that the mainstream society didn't approve of. But the historical record is thin and incomplete. Why is that? Because musicians, jazz musicians, especially black jazz musicians, weren't documented the way that writers were. They weren't written about in the newspapers. Their gatherings weren't recorded in society pages. And I'll admit that this subject matter deserves a better researcher than myself. We're only scratching the surface here in the rich history of these societies, but this subject matter, I think, is ripe for an additional podcast episode. The intersection of these fringe players and music is exactly the kind of stuff that we want to cover on this
Mm.
podcast.
Well,
Um,
do you think the written word is built upon like music is? Like music gets diffused very, very easily and very quickly. People borrow from different, you know, different styles of music and it gets infused and it gets kind of stirred into this big mix. Do you think that happens with the written word like it does music, and maybe that has an effect on how things have been recorded for historical purposes and just posterity? Like, you know,
yeah,
you'll hear, you know, you hear a lot of different influences, and like Eric Clapton will say, well, you know, like Muddy Waters and all these different guys influenced my music, um and it falls within a genre, but it becomes distinctive in its own right. And I wonder if that happens in the written word, or if the written word is like once it's written, like a book is a book is a book, and then people borrow from it, but just becomes another book. Whereas, you know, jazz gets infused with blues and country, and then there's rock, and then there's all these different, you know, different genres that pop together and they all kind of meld. Like you listen to country music now, and a lot of people go, well, that's not country. Well, yeah, I don't know who gets to say what's what, you know, but there's definitely a blending, you know, in music. To me, it feels more fluid, but I don't know that it is. It just feels more.
music is definitely more fluid in how outside influences influence it. But what I will say about literature, I think if you look back at the usage of certain words throughout history, like you can do a Google Trends or something, search for different words being used. And it's interesting, as soon as one person uses it in literature, from there it ramps up
Hmm,
typically. There's ebbs and flows sometimes, but I
yeah.
that's the only thing that I can think that technically would speak to that. there's ideas floating around, and then the more that artists or the writers discuss them,
Hmm.
the more those ideas get placed into their work, and
Yeah.
it does kind of build. Um, the language, how does language build on itself? I think it's just the
Well,
use
you
of
brought up
words, the
and you brought up
slang.
and you brought up something about like the black musicians that were coming up through the blues and the jazz and so forth. Well, the written word is somebody looking at a book. You have no idea who that person was. Like you don't see them in front of you. So
Mhm.
there's no influence on color or anything like that involved with the written word. But music, you go to a club and you may not get reported on or get much publicity or PR because, especially back in that day and age, like, oh, well, that was a black musician, even though they could have been like absolutely phenomenal, but they don't,
Yeah,
you know, it's like that movie. What was that one with Viggo Mortensen? Was it The Green Book?
the Green Book. Yeah,
Exactly. And about, this wonderful black pianist would go and play at all these places, but he couldn't eat in the restaurant or stay in the hotel where he's playing,
yeah,
that he had to go somewhere else. It's like that just blows my mind. It's like, well, he's actually the guy performing that you hired to come in and do this, and
yeah.
he can't have a meal at your hotel. It's crazy.
And he was performing for a bunch of these white people, like wealthy white people.
Yeah.
The only time that they could be in the same space as him was when he
Yeah.
was there to perform.
Isn't that insane?
Yeah,
That's where our humanity was at that point.
yeah.
Oh, crazy. Anyway, continue. Sorry.
If listeners of this show, anyone better than myself that can help us piece together this story and a rich tapestry of stories about early jazz and blues influenced by these bohemian writers and just members of the society, reach out to us and send us an email at bohemiancowboypod@gmail.com. We'd love to do an episode on it. But we can piece together what probably happened and make educated guesses from the fragments that we have. Bohemian values of rejection of convention, these ideas would have resonated with jazz musicians because what they were doing, they were breaking every rule. They were improvising and creating something new in real time. That's Bohemian in its purest form. The Bohemian aesthetic of improvisation, of breaking from tradition, of creating something in the moment. And that parallels the development of jazz perfectly. So we can infer that these two communities definitely crossed paths in their journey. Now, this brings us back to where we started, the complications and the contradictions of American bohemianism. Early on, when it arrived on the East Coast, it was funded by slavery and it influenced music in ways that we can barely document. And it claimed to rebel against the establishment while being absorbed by it. Music, art, life, living life deliberately every day because the goal is just to eat and stay alive one more day so you can make more art. These ideas are fundamental whether you're a starving artist or a bon vivant bohemian. The Bohemian gatherings at Pfaff's beer cellar in 1857, talking about money while spending plantation money, they're not villains, they're just complicated. They're human and they're products of their time, and they were just trying to create something new while being trapped in the systems that they inherited. The successful journalists of the Bohemian Club redefining the ideal to fit their comfortable lives. They're not frauds. They're just evidence of what happens to radical ideas when they get popular. They become more palatable. And the jazz musicians creating revolutionary art in spaces we can barely document, they're the real bohemians, the truest version of the ideal, choosing art over everything and living on the margins, creating something entirely new. A bohemianism in America is a story of compromise and contradiction. Arguably, most importantly, it's a story of evolution. The definition of the term has changed from its European origins when it came to America and evolved once again as it reached the West Coast. As we'll see in our next episode and the final episode on this topic, it continues to evolve as time marches on, all the way up until our modern day definition, as it tries to hold on to some small piece of the original concept. Join us again next time here at the Bohemian Cowboy. I have been Dillon.
I have been and still am, Brian.
Good for you, Brian. Good job. Join us again next time at the Bohemian Cowboy, where we will finish up our episodes about the history of Bohemia.
Awesome.